Well, we just had a fascinating couple of hours discussion, gentlemen, about the role of opportunity and innovation in getting us to upward mobility. So we've got North Carolina Public Television watching us. We are live streaming. We've got some good friends in the audience. They are alert and they are ready to hear what you both think about the juxtaposition of national and state efforts. So Governor McCrory, let me just start with you. Thank you again for being here. We just had a wonderful conversation with Catherine Truitt from your team talking about digital learning.
Great.
She is just terrific, and we have, it's just so clear that the agenda here in the state is about really engaging and empowering people closest to our kids. There's some great stuff happening. I'd love to just ask you to tell us why you're so excited and why you've actually chosen to be an education governor, because you could be a lot of other things, but education has been on the top of your list since you got in. 7 terms in Charlotte. Did that help you, hurt you?
What happened was in high school, I had a teacher named Ruth Revels, who just passed away about 3 or 4 weeks ago, as she was turning 80, and she was the head of my Indian Affairs Council, but she was my high school English and drama teacher at Ragsdale High School in Jamestown, North Carolina. And she was the one who got me interested in teaching. And in fact, when I went to Catawba College, one of my major was education and political science. And I got my North Carolina teaching certificate, student taught at North Rowan High School in Spencer, North Carolina. And my goal was to become a teacher. And what ended up happening is I got a job at Duke Power Company. I happened to interview with them, and at that time there was a recession. You took any job you could. If you got a job offer, you took it. But during my career at Duke, about 9 years of that career, I was actually the head of training and development for Duke. And I spent most of my time teaching at Duke Energy, and most people don't realize that. So teaching's always been in my blood. And I think as a mayor and as a governor, half the job is teaching and communicating and educating also. So it's in my blood, and I'm glad we have a congressman right here from Indiana, and it's great to have Luke here also. He's got a short period of time, so I want to make sure we hear from him on what the federal government's doing to, one of our major goals, Luke, is we've got to connect all people, rural and urban, to especially technology, to the best of the best, to the best teachers, to the best science, to the best education throughout the world. And of course, one way to do that is through this right here, something that wasn't around when you and I were in school.
Absolutely.
And so as Catherine, I think, has already talked about, how we can have that connectivity, no matter the wealth of your school or the wealth of your community or the wealth of the individual in a school. The one thing technology can do is make everyone equal regarding academic opportunity and academic achievement, but we've got to make sure they have that connectivity, and that's the one great advantage of technology. So tell me some of the things you're working on. And Mitch Daniels, your former governor, of course, was a great education guy who's now Purdue University president.
And our current governor, Mike Pence, another great
Mike,
education innovator. Jeannie, my story would be very similar to the governor's. I was raised in a small town, Greensburg, Indiana. My mom was a single parent mother, as I mentioned earlier, who graduated from, or who just retired recently from the Delta Faucet factory there. And I often think, about a generation ago, Hillary Clinton wrote a book that was titled with an African proverb, which it takes a village to raise a child. And it became this sort of big political controversy when, frankly, I think it ought not have been all that controversial at all. Of course, it takes a family to raise a child, but it does take a village. And this was my experience as a kid growing up in small town Indiana. Not only did my mother, of course, raise my brother and I, but the folks we went to church with, all the teachers and coaches that were a part of the fabric of our community, where everybody looked out for everybody. And I do believe that what we're talking about today is really the essence of the American dream, the idea that no matter where you were born, your station in life, your zip code, you're entitled to a God-given opportunity to succeed. And to have that opportunity be real in modern America, you have to have access to a high-quality education.
Just turned it off. So that access, often is a fixture or a figment, if you will, of state law, but it also can be impeded or supported by Congress. So a little history here. When you and I were talking a few months ago, which kind of led to this forum, you said we're looking for new ways to support state and local innovation. Yeah. And we talked a little bit about that almighty thing called the dollar. Or the maybe not so almighty thing called the dollar, and how that money flows and supports innovation or doesn't. Answer Governor McCrory's, thoughts about what you guys can do if you had total control over the Education Committee and the leadership, and let's say the Senate too. What could you do to help states make sure that real digital learning, real outcomes, real choices were actually happening if that money could flow?
So let's talk a little bit about what we did do in the recent passing of the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the replacement of the No Child Left Behind law, which had to be one of the least popular federal laws in the history of the federal government. Nothing brings an applause line quite like repealing No Child Left Behind, and brought people together.
It's a great title.
Yeah, it is a great title, and it's a great concept. I think it's important to remember, right, the idea behind the law, which was that every kid in America would have a chance, that we wouldn't leave kids behind based on their zip code or their lot in life or whether they happen to have disabilities or the like, is an important principle. Unfortunately, a lot of the accountability principles that came with that law, the idea that we ought to keep track of teacher performance, we ought to look at schools and measure their performance and determine whether they're making the grade for our students, came with the big top-down bureaucratic set of mandates that weren't workable in many communities. So we were able to maintain those accountability provisions, but provide state and local access. That's a major victory of the legislation. We are able to provide some flexibility, 3% now. I'd like to see a lot more that came along with the law. The law encourages a much broader array of charter authorizers, which is important as well. To me, though, we're nowhere near as bold as we need to be. It is about 10 to 15% of what we spend as a nation on education comes from the federal government. And yet, way more than 10 to 15% of the regulatory burdens on local schools come attached, with strings attached to those dollars. What I would like to see us do is look at programs that could block grant the federal dollars we have back to states, where innovative governors, innovative superintendents, teachers, parents could use those dollars in the way they thought made best sense. In areas with broad rural communities like North Carolina, like Indiana, devoting that to digital access may be critical in a way that in more urban centers that may be more natural, but the best way to get that dollar spent well is to let the local folks decide. And then ultimately, to me, Jimmy alluded to it in our earlier panel, that a generation ago, a common mantra of conservatives in education was we should abolish the Department of Education. Now, I've read the Constitution, as I said before, and it don't see anything in there about the Federal Department of Education, but unfortunately, when we put forward that mantra, we sound to parents and like we don't care about their child. What I think we can do is take the dollars we have and empower parents and let those parents decide.
That's right. There's nothing more important than empowerment.
We have to do at the state level. We always talk about Washington, D.C., let us decide how to spend the money. Well, sometimes the state capitals want to hold on to the power a lot, too. We have 100 different counties, 100 different school systems, many different unique needs, each different, similar dynamics, but the superintendents and the principals know best how to spend that money, and their school boards. And I also think sometimes we don't want to release the power. For example, and even teacher pay. Why not give them the money and determine how best to spread out the teacher pay based upon performance and other types of measures, and not have it be the same across the board? And this is also true, by the way, with technology. One thing we've learned in taking federal money, we buy a lot of things, but our teachers and others aren't trained how to use it. And the burdensome, one of the biggest complaints we get from teachers is all we do is test and we quit teaching. And we've got a major review going on right now is how many tests are required in teaching at this point in time. And what we've found out so far is we give some tests, like end of the year test, and then there's no follow through whatsoever. One reason you give tests is to find out where the strengths and weaknesses are, but not just the grade and how well they're doing, but what else needs to be worked on? Well, by the time we get the test scores, they've moved on to another teacher, and no one has followed up on the next steps for that student, and that's where a lot of students fall through the cracks.
And what you just said too is what the research confirms, right? It's not necessarily always the amount, although money helps, right? It's how you're spending it. And so what you're saying is give money to the local school, maybe not just for teachers and how to spend that money, but how to spend it on all sorts of stuff. And then, by the way, what about seat time? So inadvertently, the federal government reinforces what states push, which is that kids have to be in a certain amount of seats and you're going to get paid for how many kids in those seats. But what if you want to do a digital learning thing where you got 10 kids in the seats for 2 hours a day, but they're moving around the campus the rest of the time? They're not going to get their Title I money. They're not going to get most of the other categorical funds. How do we get to the heart of this agrarian-looking factory model school thing we have that makes federal and state money have to flow, and really it's fixing us in the position we're in?
Yeah, I would add to that, I was in a charter school just 2 weeks ago in the south part of Indianapolis, where when you would talk to students, some kids were graduating 1.5 years and 2 years early. Some of them you ask them what grade they're in. Well, I'm a freshman in math. I'm a junior in English, right? That with technology comes this amazing opportunity to unleash the potential of kids at their pace, in their time. This old way, one of my kind of mentors in the world of education reform is a guy named Dave Adams, who's the superintendent in the Shelbyville school system, one of my home communities. His school system was on the cover of Time magazine when the dropout epidemic sort of hit the country. Shelbyville, Indiana was the Time magazine cover story because we were the national average, 70%. 10 years later, we're now at 90% because of Dave Adams' leadership. But one of the points Dave's always made to me when you start trying to bring innovation into the classroom is almost by definition the people who are inspired to be in education, right? That want to be teachers, want to be principals, want to be superintendents. School worked pretty well for them, right? They liked the rows. They liked the chalkboard. They liked the smell of the room. They liked the bells, right? They liked all that. So to ask those people...
Trained as teachers that way, too.
Exactly.
As I was.
And so when you ask them to start thinking about how are we going to reach the next third of the kids or half the kids we're not reaching, that's just a challenge. It's a challenge for them to sort of to question those assumptions. But that's exactly what we want to do what we're going to have to do if we're going to become a country that makes sure every kid has access to a quality opportunity.
One thing we've learned about taking federal money and even state money, for example, for technology in the last 10 years, we spent a lot of money, and the people buying the technology maybe weren't qualified to determine what was the best technology, or they bought short-term technology from a specific vendor, and they bought all this stuff that was obsolete within a year, or the teachers didn't know how to use it. And that's one lesson we're learning. In fact, in my budget this year, we're proposing several $1 million for training teachers on technology, because what's the use of buying all this technology for teachers if the teachers who were trained like I was, technology wasn't around? So we've got to make sure they know how to use it, and also make sure they don't abuse it in a way.
Right, and there's about 4 or 5 major ed tech accelerators and incubators around the country. There's one right here in North Carolina called Tech Mountain, and they bring in 15, 20 companies at a time, and they experiment and do all sorts of stuff with teaching and learning. They will tell you also that you all should listen to the students. Because when they go into a classroom or school and say, how does this work? It's the students who say, nah, that's not going to really do it. You should try it this way. It's really fascinating. So the ed tech people would say, as you're considering how to move innovations down local level, bring those students in and make sure they're staying there, because they'll make sure the teachers are learning the way they learn. It's really fascinating. How do you get to this part at a time, this nirvana, which would be that we have the money moving down to the local level, we have decisions being made by educators, by people closest to kids, we have the best state-of-the-art technology, forget about all the vested interest and all the other stuff, right? How do we get to this point right now, with your legislatures, with the people around you? Like, if you could stand up and say, I want to do this tomorrow, is there one wish that you would have for your role in helping states? And Governor, is there one wish you'd have back to Congressman Messer to take back to the task force that he's a part of?
So there's a policy answer and I think a broader public question. On the broader public question, you've got to win the argument. You've got to help people understand first that that every kid deserves access to an opportunity. I think most people get that. That many kids are not currently getting access to that opportunity. I think, frankly, many people understand that, but not enough yet. And then third, explain what's the path to get there, which I believe, for a lot of the reasons the governor just articulated, is by empowering every parent to be a consumer. I don't have all the right answers of what the best technology is, what the perfect answer for every child. Part of the problem, right, is what's the right answer for one kid may not be the right answer for the next kid, right? So the best way to create a system that provides that opportunity is to turn every family into a consumer. You know, here's the dirty secret about this broader choice question in America today. We already have school choice in America if you can afford it. If you can afford to move, if you can afford to pay for your child to have access to a better school if you don't like their current school, you already have that chance. The only real question is, what are we going to do for everybody else? What are we going to do as a nation for everybody who doesn't currently have access to that? One thing we could do at a federal level is rethink the way we use Title I dollars. You know, Title I grew out of a very different system. It's institutionally based, so that money comes to particular schools that have a high percentage of kids that might have low income challenges. Many kids are almost left out of the system, even if they're a low income family that happen to be in a school system where they don't meet those institutional thresholds. I think the fairest and best way to use that money is to figure out what it means to allow parents to have access to those dollars and help them.
Making it portable.
Yeah. We use two words that Ronald Reagan used when negotiating with Russia, or the USSR at the time, and that was trust but verify. And I think the federal government and state governments have to start trusting parents more and the students more in their decision-making capability. And if the students think, or if the parents think the best decision for their kids based upon their own unique situation is to go to a charter school, they ought to give them every opportunity to do that. If it's the best, if it's a home school, they ought to give them every opportunity. If it's that other traditional public school, we ought to trust their instincts for their kids. But we also need to verify that all those options are doing their job. And that's the trick of how much involvement then is in that verification, because we have to make sure the money, the limited tax dollars are being spent the right way. But I think the bureaucracy of education at times, and also the politicians of education at this time, I don't think have enough trust in the parents and the students making these decisions. And because they really know where the good schools are. They know who the good teachers are. The word gets out very quickly.
Yeah, and can I just add to the governor's point, you know, Indiana has had a very robust choice program. Is that me squeaking like that? I don't know. But anyway, but we've had a very robust choice program. 200,000 kids in Indiana have access to varying educational choice opportunities. The largest choice program is we have open enrollment in our public school, 75,000 kids going from one public school to a different public school. We have some public school systems, frankly, with billboards up in the neighboring
And tell
county.
about how you're also the scholarship program. How many kids in that as well?
So you've got, in Indiana, to make that 200,000, you have 75,000 open public school enrollment, about 35,000 kids in charters, about 35,000 kids in homeschool, about 35,000 kids in public private voucher school programs. Again, parents making those choices for their kids, taking access to each of that assortment. But again, to me, one of the most exciting things that have happened is you've got some public school systems advertising on billboards in a neighboring county saying, hey, we have, and so they're competing with each other. And while all of that happened, Indiana's graduation rate went from 70% to 89% over that same period. So the entire school system did better with the competition that came from those programs.
You know, it's one of the most discouraging things, and I don't know if you have this in Indiana, but we do have this in North Carolina, for example, with some of our charter schools, is in order to get in the charter school, it's a lottery, it's gambling. And there's nothing worse than losing the lottery and a parent not getting the choice of school that they wanted. And I guess I think the most discouraging thing for me, as we provide more choice in schools, in traditional public schools, we're providing more choice now, from a magnet school to a special math school or art school to charter schools, and they have their specialty, to home schools. The worst thing is to have to be in a lottery for your child.
Yeah,
and
so
I
true.
hate to hear that they have 70 slots open and they have 1,000 people on the waiting list. There's something wrong then, that we're not adapting to where the demand is wanting to go, the supply versus the demand. And if we see those numbers, that means the marketplace has to adjust very quickly. And I think one of the criticisms I have toward the education community is we don't adjust quickly to the supply and demand.
How hard was that battle?
Traditional method.
Yeah, how hard was that battle? You were part of leading what was a bipartisan effort in the state legislature, not as bi as we would have liked, but now you have an opportunity scholarship program, very much like the one in D.C. and Indiana.
For it, the opportunity scholarships, and I'll tell you where the opportunity scholarship is most important, is where you know the school the public school that might be available is not meeting the needs of a student. And it might be due to a disability, physical or mental. It might be due to an overachiever that's gone way beyond what that school can offer. And why would we hold that student back from a choice? By the way, in college education, we give more choices in secondary and college and university education. We give scholarships for young people attending private universities in North Carolina. And that helps lessen the pressure on our public universities. So it's kind of ironic. We don't get criticized for giving students in universities, but we get criticized for giving first and second graders a choice.
You know, we talked about this once. We have some family who are very involved with ECU, East Carolina. And the better that school got, the more people started gravitating to move towards that university, even though you can go anywhere you want. And then the communities around got better. So we've seen in higher education how communities get better when universities, institutions get better. Have you seen that yet in North Carolina in terms of the movement for school choice? We've seen it in Washington, D.C. Congressman, have you seen it in Indiana? Does that follow that houses and structures and communities and commerce gets better?
I'm sure you've seen, is this on now? All right, here we go. We got it. So, Jeannie, I'm sure you've seen the movie Waiting for Superman, where they ask that question. What has happened in many communities in America? Is it that failing communities have brought down our schools, or have failing schools brought down communities? And it's probably an answer that's a little bit of both, but I think the conclusion of that movie, at least, is that if you've got to have great schools if you're going to have improving communities. The governor mentioned, I think, an important point. 1 million kids in America are waitlisted to go to charter schools. I think it's a national embarrassment that these families do not have access to the opportunity that they believe is best for their child. You know, I used to say in the Indiana debate that it may be true that if we provide broader choice and opportunities, that kids will empty from your school, or it may be true that you're doing a great job and serving your community very well. Those two things can't be both true. You can't both be doing a great job serving your kids and they're going to all leave your school if given another opportunity. And in fact, what's happened in Indiana is great schools have continued to do great, even in an era of competition. The families that have taken opportunities to leave are often not because they're somehow just, they may want math opportunities that aren't available in their local school program, or they may have other
areas that they're looking for. So
You've seen that too, Governor, huh?
Well, when I'm competing against Governor Pence in Indiana for jobs, and the executives are coming by and deciding between Indiana or South Carolina or Georgia and Ohio and so forth, the first question they ask is, what is my school choice for our kids? That's the first question they often ask, is what is my choice? And they always use the word, what are my choices in education? And they're not just talking about universities, they're talking about K through 12, they're talking about early education. They're talking about, so the executives are speaking for the employees, where are the choices for education? And where I can sell the most choices in any community is where we have the most success in bringing jobs. And we have very similar dynamics of an Indianapolis and a Fort Wayne versus a Charlotte and a Greensboro and a Raleigh versus a Tarboro or a Roxboro versus some of the smaller towns. The more choices they have, the better we can sell that community. And then those choices also, the schools need also providing different choices and different methods of educating.
Right. And in your rural areas, what you both share, we often think that, well, you can't have options there. How can you bring options in a rural area? But people go back to rural areas, even if they're under-enrolled. You can build that up, and I think that's the promise of the programs that you're carrying on. And Congressman Messer, I know we're going to have to say goodbye to you in a couple of minutes. I just have to say, I mean, that's one of the most extraordinary questions that I know we've ever been asked by a member of Congress in a long time, which is, how can we help make sure the great work going on in states like North Carolina continues, which was the impetus for this. And I hope we've given you some ammunition. We will continue to help. I wonder if you want to just maybe leave us with some last words that we can leave with our viewers as well as the people
I would
in the
say
room.
two things. One, just thank you for your support for this very important cause. Please contact your member of Congress and help them understand that you want their support on these issues as well. To me, it's really simple. We have to stay focused on kids. I have incredible optimism for the future of this country, frankly, because I've met a lot of our kids. And I have incredible optimism for what we can do in the world of education policy because I believe in our parents. Frankly, I believe our parents are going to demand that we bring these innovations to our schools. And we are going to become a place where every kid in America has a chance. We can do it. We know it. You see schools that are succeeding, and we just have to have a whole lot more of them. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity
Thank you
to be
so
here.
much for joining us, Congressman Messer. Appreciate it. Governor McCrory, we are going to, thank you so much. We are going to ask you to stay up here for a couple more minutes. We've got your two leading state representatives coming on up, and Jimmy Kemp is going to join you for a quick discussion before we say goodbye to you. But while we're waiting for Rob Ryan and Representative Haynes to come on up, I just wanted to give you one more chance to kind of also mention the role that you found the state legislature played in really helping advance that work and the good work they're doing.
Hey, Rob, how you doing, man?
So I'm going to leave you with that question, Jimmy, to continue, and then I'll let you have him.
I'll just say this. One thing that I said in my first State of the State speech was something my dad taught me while growing up in the Jamestown, Guilford County area, and that is every one of us must be able to fulfill our potential. And being given that opportunity, my dad had a little foundation called Namaskar, which he was helping at North Carolina A&T University. And Namaskar is an Arabic term which means the divinity within you. And he firmly believed and taught me to believe the same thing, that each of us are born with certain God-given skills. And we've got to be able to unleash those skills and unleash the potential. And anyone that fails to unleash their full potential means they're not as productive as they could be in society. And I think the legislator gets it. I think we've got to think out of the box. I mean, if you think about our education system, we haven't really gone through dramatic change. We still have the same seasons, which are based upon agricultural seasons, regardless of where we live. We still have many traditional buildings, as though the teaching is the same as it was 50 years ago when I was in school. Change is tough, especially in institutions that they like it the way it is. And we've got to put it back to what's good for the students, not necessarily what's good for the administrators or the politicians. So we've got to fulfill the potential that the divinity gave us. And that's true for everyone. And I'd end by saying this, and I'll tell you, your dad, Jack Kemp, was a hero to many of us as I observed your dad in Congress. And he came up with this concept of enterprise zones. And it was really targeting those people who couldn't achieve or didn't have the choices because of their own personal financial situation or family breakdown. And that's where I think your dad was quite unique. And watching him when I was in high school and college was understanding that there are pockets in both urban and rural areas that we need to do even more to unleash the potential of these people, because they didn't have the advantages that I had growing up, and parents who would sit down and read to me and teach me and give me those options. And that's where we need to think out of the box. And Jack Kemp was a congressman who was one of the first people, I think, to think out of the box in the areas of education and also urban renewal in other areas.
Well, Governor,
Look just like him, buddy.
all of us, I use a little less hairspray than my dad did. But, what you're talking about is transcending partisanship. And before we really let you leave, sorry, we're going to hold on to you for just a moment more, because we now have a Democrat and a Republican in your state state legislation.
Democrat.
We're in Chapel Hill.
I've been accused of not being in either party. So it's okay.
And one of the lines that we love best at the Kemp Foundation is that you serve your party best when you serve your country first. And it's clear that the need in our political climate is to highlight solutions to problems that aren't owned, the solutions aren't owned by one party or the other. And so in this really unique national and state climate in which you're dealing, how do you think that on an issue like education and empowering families, whether it's through enterprise zones, what do you see are your priorities for engaging both sides of the aisle in education, or whatever you want to talk about it? What's your vision?
One criticism I have of what's happened by both parties in the legislative system, both in Washington and at times in Raleigh, is there's not enough discussion among parties because everything's gone to the caucus.
Yep.
Rob, you know how I feel about this, is that the Democrats go to their caucus, the Republicans go to their caucus, and usually whoever's in the majority, I saw this when the Democrats are in control, and I see this when the Republicans are in control. They go in their caucus, and they get a consensus of their caucus, which is not necessarily a consensus of a broad spectrum of our state, bipartisan. And usually then when the caucus makes a decision, and again, both parties are guilty of this, they come out to the floor with their ideas with very little input. And I think this is not just true in education. I think it's true in many areas of government at both the federal and state levels, is that I don't think that's how the framers of our Constitution meant for government to work. They meant for different branches of government, but they didn't mean for these branches to have these silos of isolation of where all the people think the same way and only talk with each other. It's kind of the way our media's gotten too, where we have the conservative channel, the liberal channel, the whatever channel. Same with music stations. When I grew up, we used to listen to all the music on one station. So I think one thing that if we're going to trade ideas and think out of the box, we've got to hear from all people in the same room, and not just then have the formal public debate out in the front, but have it more out in the open. And I think that applies to education a lot.
Great.
I think it'll break down the barriers if we do that both in D.C. and in Raleigh and all other state capitals, because that same concept is occurring.
Yeah.
That's kind of a unique way to, that's how I'm going to answer your question.
I think it's critical.
I also think we need to get out of the government buildings and go visit the schools. I've learned more in education. I've learned very little from education talking to other politicians.
Yeah.
The most I've learned from education is going with Catherine to the schools and seeing a school in Trinity, North Carolina. I've never seen a school like that before, where the kids are standing on the desk reciting poetry by song, and everyone's clapping, and then everyone's, it's run by the students, and they're behaving and they're learning, and I've never seen anything like it. And yet you got to see it to believe it. You don't see it within committee discussions. And so I think the politicians got to get out and see what's actually happening, as opposed to talking among ourselves. That's where I've got the most learning from.
Right. Are we letting the governor?
Let the governor go if he wants to go.
Thank you. No, I'll let you guys talk, and thank you for this opportunity very much.
Thank you.
And it's all about problem solving and thinking about what's the vision for the future and what are the needs for the future for these kids. So I'm looking forward to hearing your solutions. Thank y'all very much.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, Governor. Yeah, I'm right here. So, tying in to that, you all are living this on a daily basis, and let's start with you, Representative Daines, on what's the hope for getting to real solutions?
Well, I'll tell you, I think that actually education is one of the areas in the General Assembly that I think that we probably pull away from this caucus mentality the most in. Yes, you have the most education experts almost anywhere else in the General Assembly in education, because everybody went to school and everybody believes they're an expert because they went to school or rode a school bus or whatever it is. But I think as you look at the votes on the floor when it comes to a lot of our educational issues, you don't see these 27 vote gaps. There is a working of the issue. There is plenty of discussion inside and outside of the caucus, and I think between folks. And I think I have found that there's probably more work across the lines in the education issue and between the lobbyists and those who are interested in choice in these type of issues than anything else I've been involved in. So that was very exciting for me to see.
Yeah. Rob, talk about how you two have worked together and how specifically how your relationship has grown during kind of around this issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually been a lot of fun, and I can't remember when we started. Ed and I worked on the Opportunity Scholarship Bill together, and I don't even remember. I mean, we're also both lawyers. We had other things, and Tar Heel alum and fans, and had other connections. I think one of our first great experiences was I was having to park my car up in Winston for some reason. I was like meeting my wife and kids to go up somewhere else, and I said, hey, I'm looking for somewhere, can I park my car at your house? He's like, yeah, sure. And Ed took me for a drive all around Winston schools he had gone to, his dad, mom had taught at, and it was just a great experience. To the governor's point about when you actually, you go and you see neighborhoods, you see kids, you go to schools, you get a flavor for something real. And you build a real relationship with someone, and for the two of us, we've continued that. Any education bill I'm running, I like for it to be bipartisan. I think that helps, and so I'll go sit down and talk to Ed and say, hey, what do you think about this? I'm working on this. Think you could get on that? He came to me recently with some other lawyer type bills and sat down and said, here, look these over. Tell me, can we move forward together on this? I think it's been great because you, even when you think, well, what is somebody else going to say about that? How would their constituents feel about it? You have somebody to immediately bounce that idea off of and say, oh, okay, maybe you got some pressure there on that. Maybe I can do something to make it to get more bipartisan draw-in by adding something to it. So, I think, we've just developed a great friendship, and I think that leads to good legislating.
And I think that's why you end up seeing multiple versions of bills, because I'll bring somebody in on a bill, and several other Democrats, and I'll say, hey, take a look at this, and I think this could be good for education, and we'll get that rural perspective, we'll get that urban Charlotte perspective, we'll get the perspectives of senators in Charlotte and senators in Raleigh. And it might be, listen, we can help move this in a certain direction, but for whatever reason, I might not be able to vote, this way this time, but let's make it the best, that we can. And you have to have a trust to do that. And, I have to be able to know that I'm not getting taken for a ride. And Rob has to know the same thing. And I think once you develop that relationship, you can do a lot of things around the edges, even in this party politic that we have to work in, right now. There's a lot of good that can be done, and I think you're seeing that especially among the younger generation of legislators that's coming through the General Assembly right now.
Yeah. I'm partial to sports. The NCAA and higher ed, when you think about universities, and I've got a 17-year-old, so one of the thoughts in my head being here on Chapel Hill's campus is the cost of college. And I've got four boys who are preparing to put through college, and you have on higher ed campuses. And here at Chapel Hill, obviously there have been issues with sports. Sports is such an attraction. It's such a wonderful medium to help young people understand about the importance of education and academics, also to understand just how human relationships work. So when you're in the legislature together, in a sense, that's a team, right? And you can compete within the team. But just when you think about the issues around higher ed, and specifically in North Carolina, talk about higher ed issues, and I want you to also weave in your perspective on Division 1A athletics, which there are lots of discussions around paying athletes to play in college. They're already getting scholarships, but they can't travel home for the death of a friend. For a family member, they can. But there's so many issues around there, and it really exposes some of the hypocrisy in our system to young people, especially those who come from lower income backgrounds. So it's not a really well-framed question, but hopefully you all have opinions. I'm guessing you do.
Are you gonna make me
No,
start?
you go right ahead.
It's funny when you started talking about the sports part. I remember this big argument in my house. I think my sister, my mom, and my dad and I all arguing about whether or not you should, pay college athletes. And,
Where'd you come down?
Strangely, my dad and I, and we often don't agree politically, but I think we came down on the side of paying them, and my sister and my mom were on the other side. And I think it was more a function, at least on some level, of saying you don't want there to be an incentive to need to get some other money somewhere else. I mean, I'm not into the weeds on what scholarships cover, but right. I'd rather them have enough to feel like they don't need to get enticed some other way. So, I don't know where that puts me. But I think, in North Carolina, we've had a long history of valuing our higher ed, and we've got loads of great universities. I mean, our funding for higher ed is, one of our K-12 struggles is we fund higher ed so much that and we keep our tuition so low and at our community college level and our university level that actually puts some pressure on our K-12. I think our institutions of higher learning have some of the same issues that K-12 has, and that they've got to think about what does a 21st century higher ed look like? How do we serve students? I mean, Ed and I have had loads of conversations about how do some of our, existing institutions that have great histories, how do they continue to serve and maybe broaden who they're serving? How do we do that? And we've got a pressure from the legislative side for them to do that, for them to be able to grow and continue as they are. They've got to be willing to change too.
Yeah, and we have to, listen, the University of North Carolina, I mean that from a system standpoint, is either the best or one of the two best university systems in the country, if not the world. And because of that, we certainly have an opportunity and a responsibility to maintain that status, and it does become difficult when we have these, what we're viewing as funding shortages in the K-12, piece. But a lot of it turns into access and what we're doing to make sure that our universities stay accessible. A lot of that has to do with tuition increases and making sure that those tuition increases are tracking our Pell Grant money so that our kids who are at some of our lower income schools aren't outspending their Pell Grant, in year 5 and then having to leave school and never graduated. And this is what we see at a lot of our schools that attract our lower income students. And so one of the bills that I'm looking at right now, I'm working on and and pitching to the university system and the Rob and some others, is a bill that would take our students who have not been accepted at their school of choice in the UNC system and actually roll them down through the rest of the UNC system so that the other schools could see the massive amounts of talent that we have applying to our schools. And so if you're applying to NC State and you don't get into their outstanding, engineering, school, perhaps you want to be introduced to UNC Charlotte. You hadn't considered the engineering school at UNC Charlotte.
Yeah.
But you hadn't considered the engineering school at North Carolina A&T State University. And this program would basically be a master application system that would open up all of the university admissions officers to these kids who weren't accepted maybe their school of choice. That's 26,000 kids rejected at the University of North Carolina last year, 20,000 at 20,000 at NC State, another 13,000 at Appalachian State, that we have 14 colleges, and I guarantee you that 10 of them don't know anything about those kids who were not accepted at these schools. And I would venture to say that those kids don't know a lot about those schools either. And we have all these gyms, and we want to make sure that we use the capacity that we have, fill the coffers, fill the seats at these schools, and then we can really start getting a true sense of where we need to be and how we can continue to be more competitive as a university system.
Yeah. Look, I think...
and I believe you should pay athletes.
You should pay
I believe you should pay them, yeah.
So it actually goes back to something that we talked about earlier. So if we are getting into an education world of specialization where we identify talents and we figure out, hey, you're really good at math and we can advance you. The social structure of our schools is so ingrained, as are the social structure of universities and kind of the expectations, but that's changing. And when we look at the innovation economy and the jobs that are out there, how many jobs are there in the U.S. right now that are available? 5-6 million jobs. And what limits people from going to get those jobs typically is knowledge of the jobs and the fact that you have to move, right? People, they get entrenched. But the reality is that in a global economy, you've got to be more mobile, more nimble, and it's frustrating. One of the tensions that I recognize is that schools are such a wonderful source of community. And it does, I can't remember who said it earlier, but it does take a community. It takes a village. I had 2 parents who loved me very much, but coaches had a huge impact on my life. So did teachers. And then the parents of other friends. And here's my point. If we're going to disrupt education, I think the place to start is sports. And I'm not sure that we should pay athletes whose education we're paying for. Sadly, I think, and I think this is sad, I think that Division I athletics is going to change because so much money is made, and it's not right to not, in our free market, if we believe in capitalism, it's not right to not pay the athletes. And so things are going to change. We already have, the bowl system has changed. You got the college football playoff. The big conferences are changing, and the ACC. Oh, it kills me how the ACC has changed. But I see the innovation on the horizon, and I think it's something that needs to be discussed more. And sports is such a great way to engage people and help them understand that.
Well, obviously it's a big money game. We understand, what the situation is. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, And I think, frankly, when we talk about college athletics, and we're very lucky, once again, we're right here in the state of North Carolina. Perhaps it's not that you need to pay athletes, but it's perhaps it is that we need to go ahead and accept the fact that you have some very uniquely talented people who are world class at what they do, and let them be world class at what they do and supplement their education and their athletic prowess in that way. And what I mean by that is we have a model for that in North Carolina. It's called the UNC School of the Arts.
Yeah.
They already do this.
Yeah.
All right. They already get some of the most talented dancers and performers and artists that this country has to offer. They're a top 15 conservatory, and they allow those students to practice their art and to become and also take, while they're practicing their art, they also become business majors. They also get tangible skills that they can take out into the real world. And if they don't happen to become that prima ballerina, which 9 out of 10 of them are not going to become.
Right.
But they can certainly work within the arts world. And so it's interesting to me why we don't see that necessarily. Yeah. And I have a feeling the reason we don't see it is because there would be a huge disruption to the money flow in what is now basically professional sports on the college level. Right. And I think we all recognize, what it is, and we contribute to that. And I have season tickets and tune in to every game, so I'm guilty.
And we would hate to see that system go, but the reality is that, especially if you have an education system that is leaving people behind, and where you bring athletes in and take advantage of them, and then they're not prepared afterwards. That is really painful to see, and I think it sends a message throughout our school system to young people who idolize the players they see on TV and on the courts. I'm sorry, I got a little sidetracked by that, but I think sports is a way into engaging our lower income communities with our value system, and the value system they see is Nike, Under Armour, the competition, who's getting what stuff at the college athletics level, and you don't hear very much about the academic All-Americans and all the hard work that goes in academically, and it's goodness. Yeah. There are a lot of issues there. Cool. Look, this has been a great day. I think you all have been great to be with us. What one or two closing thoughts do you have, Rob, to kind of sum up what you view as the most important education issues from your perspective in the State House?
I think for me, I just, try to ask myself a question you've heard up here a couple times already. Our goal as we are public servants, and and my question in education issues is always, are we serving kids well by what we're doing? Yep. And when I look out on the landscape, I want to say we have to be forward thinking in how we're serving them, because we are serving them today, and Ed and I work on a lot of things that we'll throw out to try to get immediate needs addressed. But those are a lot of Band-Aids. We're also trying to look more forward to say, are we creating cures by what we're doing? Are we creating a 21st century education model that's going to serve our kids' kids? Not just our kids, but our kids' kids. Mm-hmm. And so I think, for me, that's what, when I go through that analysis, I want to say, is this in the best interest of kids today and, 20 and 30, 40 years from now?
Right. And the way I would respond to that is the simple question I had earlier, and that's, why can't we? Yeah. I just got back from a trip to Singapore, and I saw 5 million people. I learned the story of 5 million people on a 10-mile island and what's possible when you all pull in the same direction. They've only had their independence 59 years, and they made some very specific decisions about how they were going to live their lives and how they were going to educate their kids. And while they have produced some of the smartest kids in the world, they have not produced the innovators that America has, but we've produced all these innovators because of the way we educate our kids, but we're leaving a certain segment of kids behind who aren't getting there. And I look at what they've done in Singapore and say, if we can all pull in the same direction, we can achieve. Exactly, in some regard to what they've been able to do over there. They have a 99% literacy rate. 99%. And it's because they decided they were going to do it. It was in the national interest to make it done. And so I would say that if we want to talk about a Carolina comeback and we want to talk about doing things the right way in this state, we have to make sure that we don't leave 30% of our population behind in 12, 7, 15% reading proficiency. And we need to take a look and see what other folks around the world are doing and make sure that we continue to work in the aisle, across the aisle, whatever way you want to talk about it, to do what's best for kids and leave the politics out of it.
Yeah. Well, from your lips to God's ears, I don't think the politics are going to be left out of it, but we've got to be able to engage through the politics because the issues are too important. And thankfully, we've got people like you two and the others who participated today. I want to thank you both for all your time, for your efforts. It's a high calling that you've answered. And I want to thank the people who joined us. I believe we have a reception afterwards outside, and we're thrilled that you joined us. And if you want to know more about the Jack Kemp Foundation or Center for Education Reform or Opportunity Lives, please come up to us afterwards or use your own personal Google machine. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks,